Alright, so time to move on to do a little bit more weathering, or some weathering. I've already used pencil graphite just to get into the wing roots and so on here. A little bit of just general light scuffs, wear and tear around different parts of the airframe. Not going too mad, given that the aircraft wasn't that old in terms of being in service and all the rest of it. So just don't want to go too mad, really. Just create enough wear and tear there to make it look a bit more interesting. So that's that. But then we can move on to have a look at using some of the Humbrol weathering powders here. And what I'm looking to do is do a little bit of post shading. And one of the great tones in the range is smoke, which you can see here, which is excellent. So I'm really looking forward to having a play with that. And so for that, a really good use, I think, is to do a little bit of post shading on some of the panel lines underneath. So you don't want to go too mad, I don't think, with this, not least of which because you've got the scale. But in terms of just the panel line shading, there's other streaking and bits and bobs we can deal with later. Literally a little bit of the powder, as you saw me there, just put a little bit in the lid. And you can just gently pull that along. This is why a matte finish, or what we've ended up with, which is a slightly satin finish from the different varnishes we've used so far. And then just a finger there to just blend in the last little bits there. Bring it a bit closer. A bit of shadowing around this centre piece here. So you can use your finger, and also you can use another, just a clean brush, one of my pasteling type brushes I use here. Just use that to kind of blend that in a little bit, just so you then get a little bit more of a subtle kind of ghosting type effect. Hopefully you can see that, and that's just showing up on the film. Now I haven't tackled this left wing here at all. I've just looked at the centre section here, and if you wanted a little bit more, you can just go add a little bit more powder, just create a slightly stronger effect, and you often got lots of streaking back from the engine cowl under here. And especially in this scale, I think this kind of thing works really well. So you can see there, just added a nice little bit of a general mank to the underside. So just do a little bit more. Surprisingly effective a finger. Just does enough to kind of blend it away in there. And what that's done is just grubbed up that blue so that it doesn't just look straight kind of two-dimensional. I think it's now got a little bit more life to it, which is the kind of thing that I think you want. And while we're on the underside, we could have a tiny little bit of hydraulic fluid type staining here from the hinges for the flaps. So you can see again, just a little bit bit of grubby there. Okay, so you have a good old play with that, but that's, honestly, these powders I think are very subtle, very effective, and just play with the different colours depending on the kind of thing you want. So for me, grey is perfect on a light blue, or indeed a light grey painted surface. In a minute, we're going to have a look at using the black and some of the browns to create the exhaust staining, which is quite a feature, I think, of 109s. You've often got lots of staining kind of down, sort of up here and down into the wing root, and then also it crept up some of these panel lines, so we can have a look at that. But I think in order to lay down a little bit of base for that already, we can use, because of the blue, we can use the smoke again here. Subtlety is the watchword here, and so just doing that, notice the difference I think that we've got here, which I think is really nice subtle enhancement of those panel lines, whereas the ones we haven't done on the back all looks a bit two-dimensional here. So that's for me, that's a really exciting use of these weathering powders, because you can kind of fairly quickly get some great effects. I think all too often, sometimes these panel lines are overdone if you use ink, and again, for me, that's why this blows away ink, really, I think, or oil washes on this kind of surface, because for me, I want, and in this scale, I want much more subtlety than that. So, of course, you could use those products, but for me, I think powders and pastels, and particularly these Humbrol weathering powders, I think are an absolute treat. So there we go. You can have a good old play yourself now, I'm sure. But essentially, that's shown how you can use the smoke initially, anyway. So I finished adding the smoke to the blue RLM 65 blue areas, and I'm particularly pleased with how that's come out. I think that panel line enhancement is really subtle, but it looks used. Now we need to move on to the exhaust staining. Lots of ways you can do exhaust staining, but for me, I think one of the best ways I've found to do it is to take your time, build it up. Having looked at lots and lots of reference pictures, just check out the net, that's the easiest thing, or look at one or two of the references. There's some fantastic titles from Valiant Wings Publishing and others that show multiple pictures, but just check out the images and just see where Bf109Es, particularly of the theatre, weathered. And interestingly enough, there's quite a variety of different exhaust staining patterns. It seems pretty heavy, and just sort of blooms up and back from the exhaust back here. Doesn't seem to travel often too far up the fuselage. It tends to kind of stay reasonably low above the demarcation line here. You can see between the blue and the 71, and then often extends down onto the lower middle fuselage here. You often get a bit that creeps up. So I don't want to go too mad. I think it might just spoil the look of the model, but let me just give you a bit of a flavour for how we're going to approach this. So don't forget, you're going to need some of your stubby brushes cut down just for the purpose, and I just get about, I must have about 12 or 15 of these old brushes, different flat brushes, round brushes, all the rest of it, where I've just chop them back when they've pretty much come to the end of their useful painted life, and then you've got a whole an array of different bristle heads that you can use to create different patterns. So that's the first thing. We're going to be using these Humbrol weathering powders, the smoke, which is one we use for the panel lining underneath. We're going to use a bit of dark earth as well. And finally, we're going to also use, and in fact, we'll start with this one. We're going to use some of the black, because interesting enough, when I look at the exhaust staining, I don't seem to notice any white oxidization or white staining in the patterns particularly always seems to be quite dark. So that's why I've selected these shades here. And it very much is a case of taking your time and building up. So we'll get the black on the go first. Now, you don't get lots of chances to get this right, so that's why I suggest it's useful to take your time and gently build it up. So what I'm going to do is create the base, pretty much kind of the base outline pattern to start with. I'll get the majority of what I need in, and then we'll do some blending, and we'll look at some of the other opportunities we can use to finish it off. So I don't want much on here at all, so I always use the lid, and then I can just stub the bristles into a clean part of the lid, and then we end up with sufficient on here. So it's very much a sort of a, I don't know, how do you describe it? Well, just watch it really, that's probably the easiest thing to do. So I'll just shut up and you can watch it and then see what you think. But reserve judgment, it's going to take a while to build this up. Okay, so having got some on, what I want to do is just get my blending brush, which is this sort of one here. I'm just going to do a little bit of blending on that. And I think it's really when you start the blending that it starts to kind of begin to look a bit more convincing, really. Okay, that's coming on nicely. Back to the black. Now, for me, I don't want to go much further with the overall kind of staining, but you get the idea. No, personally, I quite like that so far. I think it's coming on quite nicely. I'm just going to get my thin pointy brush here, and I just want to kind of bring this up the panel lines a little bit more. So not adding more, just simply blending what's there, really. Okay, so I think mostly for the black, that's enough for that side. And already, you know, I think it's looking quite good. So I think some brown. I want to add a little bit more. I want to add some brown just to give it a little bit of depth, really, I suppose, and richness, a little bit more richness. So I've got another slightly different head for that one, slightly smaller one. Let's get a bit. Right, okay. So this isn't going to be down the whole thing. It's just going to be mostly just down in and around the exit areas here. So you can see it's just subtly switched the look from just black to kind of a blacky, exhausty, browny kind of look as well. So for me, I think that's not far off, if I'm honest. I think looking at, it's interesting because looking at the photographs of the real thing, you get on the 109, you've got these two sort of shrouds really above and below the exhaust, and what they seem to do is be quite effective at keeping the exhaust off the lower cowl here, or indeed above it here. It tends to stay within and then all the way back. So I think what we need to do is just go back to our black, and I just want to build some into the recess. Yeah, because you wouldn't have lots of white areas there, so that's just got rid of those white areas there. I don't know, you can decide, but for me, I like that. I think that's good. I think it's representative of what I've seen on a number of 109 pictures, and then if we compare that to the side we've done nothing with whatsoever, it's all a bit stark, isn't it? So we've got to do something. So I think, depending on how far you want to go, that's quite convincing from my point of view. But it's very much a matter of personal taste. You can add as little or as much or whatever you want. But that, for me, is good use of these Humbrol weathering powders for the exhaust staining, and pretty much brings us to an end of the project. So what we're going to do is I'll do the other side, just like you've seen here. We'll put the rest of the 109 together, and then we can take a little view and see whether we need to do any more. I think one of the things I'm going to check out is whether there is in fact any exhaust staining down the wing, leading edge of the wing. It's something that I think is very often overdone on models, which is such a shame, because, you know, very often it's not visible on the real thing. Sometimes it is, but often it's not. And so I think that's something that is well worth a look to just check, did that happen on 109s, and if it did, what does it look like? And then we can represent that again using some of these pastels. So we'll come back and have a look at that if we need to later.